up, how way, ay, 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 ay. How we up, how we up, ay, 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 ay. Ay, 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 ay. How way, ay, 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 ay. How way, ay, 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 ay.
Welcome back to the second hour of The Bridge with Kira. I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Suzanne Posel. She's always a really good person to check in with about news, and especially our Trump nightmare that we're undergoing right now. I'm glad that you're all sticking around, and thank you, Stephen, for hosting, and thank you to all the radio stations who are covering this show tonight: Revolution Radio, Real Liberty Media, and People's Internet Radio. My next guest is a filmmaker, and he is making a film about police corruption and police brutality. Welcome to The Bridge, Ramsey Denison.
Hey, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Right on. So you're a little bit like the sound there, like a little high, maybe. Might
Okay.
want to turn down your turn yourself down a little bit there. And,
okay, how's this?
That's better.
Is that better? Okay.
Yeah. So, are you still making the film now, or is it still in production, or are you finished with it?
No, we finished the film in December, and we premiered it at the Cinequest Film Festival in March, and we've played at about 6 or 7 film festivals since then. So the movie's done.
Okay. By the way, Mike Bluehair says hello. He did see the screening in Texas. He's the guy with the blue mohawk. So he.
Oh, really? Mike Bluehair, right?
Yeah.
Is he the one in Austin or at
Yeah,
in
Austin.
Oh, yeah.
He's
good. So he's an activist then.
Yes. Formerly,
Okay.
well, I guess filmed the Police Portland, but he's in Texas now, and he's been on the show a few times.
Oh, great. Yeah, we had a screening at the Austin Film Society. I think I remember Mike Bluehair, actually. I don't know. It's hard to forget that blue hair. It
is hard to forget that blue hair, isn't it?
Yeah.
Isn't it? And he's all about police accountability. So that conversation really needs to happen in this country.
Definitely. And what I found in Las Vegas is that police accountability is just non-existent. I mean, you basically have a situation where the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department does what they want to do, makes videos disappear when they need to, and basically gets away with it. That's what I was shocked to discover. And I was shocked at how the citizens could let it happen time and time again. So, I mean, that's really, the movie kind of delves into these things on a deeper level. But you just wouldn't think that police would be allowed to run amok so much in 2017, but that's the situation they pretty much have in Las Vegas. I mean, police officers are brutal. I mean, it's just, they're, in my opinion, one of the deadliest and dirtiest police departments in the country, and in the opinion of many others.
And this is coming from someone who's in LA, like you're currently in LA. So
yeah, not that we're any kind of a model department either.
Right.
Nobody said that. So certainly nobody said that.
Right, yeah. Right. So they're up there with LA, or you think they're worse than LA?
That's a good question. I don't really know. I mean, I did just finish watching OJ Made in America, which basically makes the argument that I mean, that the LAPD is an embarrassment. I mean, I mean, it's hard to watch OJ Made in America and come to a conclusion other than that. But
right.
I don't really claim to know enough about the LAPD to compare them. And also, I live in Los Angeles, so I don't particularly need to be getting pulled over for no reason.
Right.
You know, I mean, one of the things that allowed me to make this film about and tell the truth about the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department was the fact that I live in Los Angeles. If I lived in that community, I think I'd be crazy to make that film because I think there'd be repercussions, you know?
Absolutely, there would be. 100%.
And as usual, they get away with it, you know?
Of course. So were you making films before this incident in Las Vegas?
No, I wasn't making films in Las Vegas. You know, I live in Los Angeles, and I work in the television business as a television editor. So I've worked on a lot of television shows. I started off my career working on Chris Angel Mind Freak, you know, the magic show, and I've worked on a lot of shows since then. So I was kind of coming to it from as an editor and a television editor and somebody who's very experienced in the television realm. So this was actually my first feature-length documentary.
Wow, that's exciting. And it's an accidental happening for you. It's not something that you planned, but something that came out of a traumatic experience.
Yeah, it was a very bizarre experience. I mean, what happened is a couple of years ago, I was actually on vacation in Las Vegas. I'd gone there because I just finished working on a really difficult and stressful television show. And I was just on a vacation, and I was walking out in a parking lot at night with my friend, whose name is Rhett Nielsen. And we happened to see a group of police officers with this guy in custody. You know, this guy was kind of bent over the front of a police car, and he was handcuffed. And basically, you know, you have these officers just screaming at this guy and what to me looked like kind of torturing him and enjoying it. They were telling him, you know, does your mama know she raised an F up? Does she know that, son? And they were twisting his cuffs. It looked to me like they were kind of cutting off his circulation, and he was screaming his head off. And interestingly enough, the friend that I was with, Rhett, he'd actually worked for the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department SWAT team as a videographer. So he was a SWAT videographer for years. He wasn't currently working for them at the time. He was like retired from that, but for 7 years he'd done that job. And he was looking at me going, man, this is wrong. What these officers are doing is wrong. And because instead of like getting the situation under control, they were laughing at him and telling him, you know, does your mama know she raised an F? And so we sat there and watched this for maybe 5 or 6 minutes. Could have even been longer than that. And the guy's friend actually came along and walked over to one of the officers and said, why are you doing this to my friend? And the officer started pushing him. So he started pushing this friend like really aggressively. And so I made a phone call to 911. I called 911 and said, you guys got to get a sergeant or a lieutenant down here. This is crazy. You got officers like torturing this guy. You got to get somebody down here and fix this. And a couple minutes later, I got beaten up, arrested, and thrown in jail by those same officers that I reported. And then I was shocked at how the video conveniently went, you know, never surfaced. And, you know, and so, and I was just like, you know, I mean, these officers who did this, Mark Bellinger, Kyle Frett, and Jared Casper, I was just shocked at how they were not held accountable in any way. Because I reported this to Internal Affairs, and the people I was dealing with, Internal Affairs, Michelle Jotz and Christopher Little, I guess they came to the conclusion that this was acceptable because, you know, a couple months after I reported it, I got a letter from the Internal Affairs saying that no wrongdoing occurred. So I guess Michelle Jotz and Christopher Little think that there's nothing wrong with beating up, arresting, and throwing a citizen in jail because they made a phone call to report police brutality. I guess that's okay in their book. And you know, Mark Bellinger, Kyle Frett, and Jared Casper were not held accountable in any way. They're right back out there. And I mean, who knows what they're capable of? I mean, but they weren't punished, and I was just really kind of shocked. I said, wow, in a town you can get beaten up, arrested, and thrown in jail just for making a phone call to report police brutality. What else was this wildly corrupt police department gotten away with? And so I started using my skills. You know, I have a degree in journalism, and combined with being a television editor, I started looking into these cases in the LVMPD and discovered, you know, numerous instances where, the video cameras weren't working, or, you know, it's like, it's interesting. It's like video cameras just never seem to work when it contradicts their story in Las Vegas. And but I think what I was most shocked by was that the citizens let this happen. I mean, they let this department run amok over the community. And so my film explores that, and it's really an examination of what happens to a community when a police department is allowed, is not held accountable and allowed to do whatever they need to do. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. It becomes part of the culture. The
Absolutely.
police corruption becomes part of the culture, and so it's not seen as unacceptable anymore.
No.
Right. So, and I think you would find that in many cities across the country, that it's just part of the culture. I would agree with you.
I think Las Vegas is particularly brutal because there's just, and I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why that's the case. And one of the conclusions, one thing that many people have suggested is Las Vegas is a very transient community. A lot of people are in and out of Las Vegas. I mean, I think I saw something, that the average resident lives there less than 3 years. So it doesn't really feel like home to a lot of people. A lot of people come, a lot of people go every day. And so I think places where there is a sense of community, where like people grew up there and take a place like Pittsburgh or something like that, like people are born and raised and die in Pittsburgh, but it's not really the case in Vegas. So because it doesn't really feel like their home or their community, you have a lot of apathy. And so I believe that's one of the reasons that the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department is allowed to run amok with zero accountability, is because the citizens let them do that, which is shocking and sad, but it's pretty much the case. They get away with just about everything in Las Vegas.
So when they arrested you, what did they charge you with?
Well, that was the funny thing. They they gave me some trumped up charges about, I'm trying to remember what they were exactly, but then what they ended up doing. So they gave me some high level charges so they could hold me in jail. But then when I went in front of the judge 3 days later, they'd reduced the charges to like a super low level misdemeanor, which I believe was resisting arrest. And what I believe that was is, they had to have serious charges to hold me. So they used trumped up charges and then changed them because they knew they were BS and they knew they'd never stick. So it was a situation where they overcharged me to kind of teach me a lesson, I believe, hold me for 3 days. And then it ended up being like this low level misdemeanor. But it was a very shady situation. And, and also the fact that they changed the charges. I mean, why did they do that? Because they knew they were BS.
Right.
That's my opinion and the opinion of many others. But yeah, it was a shocking experience, and I never saw it going. I mean, why did I make the phone call? I just never thought anything like that would happen.
Sure.
I saw something I thought was wrong, and I wanted it to stop. And I think if I had it to do over again, instead of making a phone call on my phone, I simply would have pulled it out and started videotaping. Yeah. And then very quietly made sure that video got into the right hands. But at the time I was just a citizen on vacation, and I wasn't thinking in those terms. But that's what I would do now. And I don't think I would necessarily go to the department's internal affairs department, because I think a lot of department, particularly Las Vegas's internal affairs department, is awful. I mean, they aren't, I don't believe they have any interest in holding their officers accountable. So that's one of the problems too, is you have police doing an investigation on themselves. I mean, imagine somebody had you do an investigation on yourselves. You'd probably conclude that no wrongdoing occurred, just like they do. So I think one of the problems in this country is that we treat police officers too well. The unions are too strong. And I just think there's something deeply un-American about having this privileged class that gets away with murder. And that's what you have in Las Vegas. You have a privileged class of people who basically can kill and get away with it. So I think that I think America's starting to wake up to this and realize that there's something deeply wrong with policing in America, and that it needs to stop. And so, that's one of the reasons I made this film, and it's also the reason I want to share the movie with communities, and not just the Las Vegas community, but to other communities, and so I can show them, hey, this is what happens when a police department is not held accountable. Do not let your city end up like Las Vegas, where you have murderers walking around with badges. This is not acceptable, and you need to hold your police officers accountable. So that's one of the reasons we made the film, is to show people. It's almost a cautionary tale. Do not let your city end up like Las Vegas.
Right. Well, I mean, we could get into how the whole idea of the police department is a fiction anyway. I mean, they come out of the old slave catching system. I mean, that's how police departments started, from slave catching units of citizens. Yeah. So, I mean, the whole idea of a police department being who you can count on to protect you and everything, is propaganda. I'm not saying that there aren't good cops out there, because obviously there are. And I have met a few in my life that are really good people. They just want to help, and that's why they become cops. But once those good people become cops, they become involved in a basically a fraternity or a system that teaches them that they are special, and basically turns them into proto psychopaths, or basically turns them into psychopaths in order to function in that job.
That's right. And you also have a system that works against good police officers, sadly.
Right.
I personally believe that the problem is not that most cops are bad. The problem is the ones who are. The Mark Bellingers and the Kyle Fretts and the Jared Caspers get away with it. I mean, look at them. These cops are back out there working. They're on the streets of Vegas working, and absolutely nothing was done to hold them accountable. They got away with it. And so what lesson has been taught to them? You can do whatever you want, and you can get away with it. Because we got your back. You're one of the boys in blue. We got your back. The video needs to disappear. We'll make sure it disappears. We'll lie on the stand. We'll do whatever needs to be done, because you're one of the boys in blue. You're part of this privileged class. It's un-American. And I think Americans need to stand up and start telling these police officers, you're not special, you're not privileged, and you need to be held accountable, or you're not going to have a job. And that's not happening. And part of the problem is the police unions are very strong, and they protect these scumbags no matter what. I mean, even when an officer is just proven to be an outright scumbag, like this guy who shot the 15-year-old in Dallas. Are you familiar with that story? A couple of weeks ago? The kid, you had this kid. He's 15 years old. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was simply driving away from a party in a car, and you had this officer shoot him without provocation. Then he lied and said the car was coming towards him, and then the dash cam showed it was driving away, and that he in fact hadn't even done anything wrong. He was a good student, a good football player. So in other words, this cop murdered somebody for no reason. And yes, he was charged with the crime, but he was released on bail, and he's probably out walking around now. That guy belongs in prison for the rest of his life. He's a murderer, in my opinion. And I would like to see anybody make the argument otherwise. I mean, he basically killed a good kid for no reason, and we'll see if he gets away with it. But it certainly feels, I think if he was anybody else and he'd done something that unprovoked, he would certainly spend the rest of his life in prison. And this guy needs to be in prison. I mean, this is one of the worst shootings to me, this is as bad, if not worse, than the Eric Garner case. But, hopefully justice prevails. But, justice is tough when police officers are involved, because they're special. Right.
And then, so just going back to the idea of the propaganda and how we think of police departments and police officers and all of this, is that if you look at entertainment, for instance, the amount of entertainment that is centered on police, cop shows, detective stories, all that, it's intense. I mean, if you go to entertain yourself, even just like on Netflix or television or whatever, it's almost half the stuff out there is about police. And
Right.
the story goes, there's a really bad guy. The cop had to bend the rule in order to get him, because they're constrained too much by the law, and
Right.
they need to be able to bend it to get these really, really bad guys. That's the undercurrent of every single one of the stories. So
Right.
it's teaching you that, oh yes, there's this danger, and yes, there's these out of control cops, but they're actually really good, and they're trying to protect us, and they just get out of control because the bad guys are so bad. So that's the same story that we hear that we hear and see over and over and over in every single show that we watch. So that's a brainwashing system going right there in our minds.
Right.
And then, when we have these bad cops that are protected by the system, they kill somebody, the media that's bought and paid for, the unindependent media, I should say, mainstream media, bought and paid for, they are a media wing for the police. They will say and do anything that the police ask them to do, and they will engage in a smear campaign against the victim.
That's right. That's right. I mean, and there's a very clear reason for that. I've worked on, as a television editor, I've worked on a lot of true crime shows. And I even worked on a show one time where they posted a sign in the edit bay that said, do not use any footage that shows the police in a disparaging light. And why why is that? Because you need the cooperation of police departments to do all these shows, like when you see these like reality shows with police departments or following Houston PD or whatever, that you can only make that show. And, that if you have the cooperation of that police department, which means you basically have to kiss its ass and talk about how wonderful they are. And that's what a lot of these companies do. These companies that make shows with police departments, anything that shows them in a negative light is going to be on the cutting room floor. And so they're part of the problems too, and they're part of the propaganda machine. And like I said, I mean, it even goes so far as like posting signs in the edit bay, don't use anything that shows police in a bad light. But so it's money. It's about money. And you're right. I mean, a lot of these shows are just straight up propaganda for the cops, showing how wonderful they are, Now, I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of stuff on the cutting room floor that doesn't show that, and that stuff doesn't see the light of day, So.
Right. But I mean, then you get shows that come out, like one of my favorite shows when it was out was The Shield.
Right.
That was a great show, and it was really gritty, and it showed the reality of corruption and things like that. So somehow
that's a fictional show,
right?
So that's
right.
different. When you have a kind of a documentary type show, those are kind of like, I mean, they have to be more in pocket than the police because the police are not going to let you follow them around if you're going to be making them look bad. Right.
Right. Yeah. So the documentary shows have these special rules, and we can only get into.
They do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, why? At the end of the day, it's about selling people detergent or selling people. I mean, the only reason any show is on the air is because it's the commercials and selling people things. So if you can't get the cooperation of the police department because you made them look bad, then you don't have a show. So you end up in a situation where it's just police officers are wonderful, and that's what most of these shows are,
Right. That and the money part and the fear of retaliation, which is very real. Very,
right.
very real. And that's how things work in the government as well, not just
Right.
the police. Is that we have all these great civil rights laws and things like that, which you need a lawyer to enforce. It's not just automatically enforced for you. These civil rights laws, and then you have agencies where when these civil rights laws and other types of laws are violated, the agencies move to protect the violator rather than the person who's been violated or the people.
That's right. I mean, police unions in particular are strong, and it's sickening how they just throw their force behind an officer because he's one of the boys in blue. Well, what about the fact that he was completely wrong? I mean, what about those cops in the Eric Garner case? I mean, they're wrong. I mean, what they did was just flat out wrong. And then I remember a couple of days after that happened, you had one of the New York Police Department, I forget his name, but he was one of the guys in charge of the unions there in New York. And he comes out and says, these poor officers, like trying to evoke sympathy for the officers. And he, instead of the fact that Eric Garner, who had kids and was killed for no reason, this jerk's on television saying, these poor officers have to live with having taken a life for the rest of their life and pull out your tissues and cry for them. And it's just like you want to puke because this jerk is trying to evoke sympathy for murderers who did something wrong. And that's wrong. Like the unions are too strong and they what I think? I think they should start having the unions be on the hooks for some of these shootings, instead of having the public pay out $5 or $6 million to like Eric Garner's family. How about we have the unions do that? And then we'll see if they go out and try to evoke sympathy for these murderers. Right. I think they'll change their tune, if it's all about money and that it is, I bet you they'll change their tune if they have to start being on the hook for this stuff. But I just think policing's really gone off the rails in this country. They've been given too much power. They're treated too well, and they're a privileged class. And America, they ultimately work for us. The police work for us, and they've forgotten. And I think they're really good at forgetting that. And the unions are really good at forgetting that. And we need to get back to reminding police officers that they work for us.
Didn't Trump say that we needed to strengthen the police force?
I just don't pay much attention to that clown. I mean, whatever what he says goes in one ear and out the other. I mean, you talk about a jackass disaster. I mean, it's just like I mean, whatever he says. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what he says. I try to pay very little attention to what he says and just try to forget that this guy is running our country.
It's scary stuff. So what would that look like, strengthening them? Like, okay, giving them more power? They don't have enough.
Clearly that's what we need. Let's give them some tanks. Let's give them more guns.
They've got them.
Clearly that's a great idea. Yeah, clearly the problem with policing in America is that they don't have the tools to do the job, right? Yeah, you got it, Donald. Keep up the good work, buddy.
I remember when our town got a tank. Our town's police got a tank, and they put it on Facebook. They were proud of their new tank.
Right.
And people flipped out. They were like, "What do you need that for?"
Right.
They're like, "We assure you, it's to keep you safe." From what? Yeah. That was the last time they did something
of course,
like that.
Is like when people have tools, they want to use them, right? It's like if you get a kid like a Christmas if you get him a tool set, he wants to go out and like use his tool set. He wants to like use his hammer and build a Ford or whatever. But so if you give these cops tanks and you give them more weapons, and it's like they don't want to just have them sit there gathering dust. They want to go out and use them, man.
Yeah. So
tank, man,
So that must be how they get to the point where they'll just call a prayer circle a riot so they can start attacking people, and driving their tanks in. And that's a desperate situation. They got to use that stuff.
We need to move more towards a community policing paradigm where I think a lot of damage has been done to the image of police in this, especially over the last 5 years. And I think they need to, and you never see them do this. They need to kind of admit that they've taken a wrong turn and kind of like start repairing the public's trust. But I mean, and kind of like maybe building more of a relationship with the community, because the problem is when the community doesn't like you, when the community doesn't like the police, they won't call the police if they know about a crime. If their neighbor's friend, if there's neighbors getting burglarized, if their attitude is like F the police, they're not going to help the police. And so it's unfortunate because the truth is the problem is not that most officers are bad. The problem is that the ones who are get away with it.
Yeah, and that's the whole reason too why, you know, people don't get help for drug addiction is because we've put drugs into the so-called, you know, justice category, the criminal justice category rather than the public health category. So because there's you know, jail time involved with people's addictions, they end up dying instead of getting help because they're afraid of jail.
Right.
You know, so there's that whole problem too. So not only do the police need to repair their trust with their communities, but we need to really think about what criminal justice really should look like and really is, because we're not protecting anyone from anything. You know, when the police show up,
that's why they're supposed to be there. You know, it's like I have a very smart friend who said recently, like, you know, or there was a politician who said recently, if we're not helping the people, we should all pack it up and go the hell home. You know, and it's like, I mean, I like that politician because that person understands what it's about, and I mean, that's exactly right, isn't it? If you're not in politics to help the people, then you should go the hell home, you know? And if you're not in policing to help the community, then you should go the hell home, you know? And I think it's very clear that, you know, there's a lot of bad police officers in this country and they're getting away with things.
So since you live in LA and you would be afraid to make a movie like this in LA, would you be somebody who might take this experience and start, you know, organizing at the community level to reform? Mm-hmm.
That's what I'm interested in, and that's the next step for a movie. Is we're interested in organizing community screenings and going out and talking to the community, because, you know, I mean, before this happened to me, I was not an activist of any kind, and I certainly wasn't a police accountability activist. And what made me one is watching, you know, this experience of getting beaten up, arrested, and thrown in jail simply for making a 911 call to report police brutality, and watching the officers get away with it, you know? And I just, and I understood, wow, there really is very little accountability for police officers, and this really can happen to anybody. And so our next step is going into the community and doing screenings for the community of the movie, and listening to the, you know, and engaging in a dialogue with the community to kind of hear what their concerns are about the police department and sharing what we can do to fix this problem. So that's the next step is getting this thing out into the community with the message of don't let your town end up like Las Vegas.
So if somebody wants you to screen the movie in their town, do they contact you, or how are you? Okay.
The best way to do that is to follow our Facebook page, which is What Happened in Vegas. If you just go to Facebook and look up What Happened in Vegas, you'll see. And I want to make a distinction here. A lot of people incorrectly call it What Happens in Vegas. But Ashton Kutcher's not in my movie. So that's a movie that was made like 10 years ago with Ashton Kutcher. That's not our film. Our film was called What Happened in Vegas. So if you look that up on Facebook, or our Twitter handle is at WHVegasDoc. So you can find us on either Twitter or Facebook. And we've actually been talking to a number of people about doing community screenings. I just talked with somebody today about doing one in Orange County, and you know, and we're going to do one in Colorado coming up. So we'd love to talk to more people about doing screenings in their community and helping this problem.
So what kind of groups have you been working with so far? And are you looking
police accountability organizations, you know, organizations who are, you know, activists. We did a screening, actually the screening with Blue Hair Mike. That was Antonio Bueller's Peaceful Streets organization.
Okay.
So we're kind of working on an activist level. And the other thing I'm interested in really is not just preaching to the converted, but also talking to just regular people in the community. We screened at a film festival in Chicago a couple weeks ago, and it was just, they've had a lot of problems with police in Chicago, and it was one of the best screenings we ever had because the community was just very, very concerned about what was going on with police in their community, and it was just a great Q&A. They were very engaged and very and a lot of these are just regular folks, grandmothers they're worried about their grandkids getting shot. So I really enjoyed talking to just everyday folks and hearing their concerns. And my message is, I think a lot of these problems can go away if we demand that cameras are on every officer in America. And this is key, that those cameras are monitored by an external entity that is not the police. And I think you can solve a lot of these problems, and when you hear the police whining about, well, that video is taken out of context, et cetera, okay, it won't be taken out of context if the cameras come on when they sign on, and, then people can rewind and see the 2 hours leading up to it, So I really think that that's what we need to demand, and we need to stop listening to their, they don't want that to happen. And so they hide behind this, well, it's too expensive kind of thing. Really? Because I know you can get a camera for about $30 nowadays, and you guys can afford tanks and helicopters and horses, but you can't shell out $30. Well, you need to, you need to make it a priority because it's become pretty clear that people are losing their lives and people aren't being held accountable. And you guys are trying to sell this, it's too expensive thing. Well, why don't you just go with a couple less tanks? Why don't you leave a couple of those horses in their stall and do what you should be doing? Oh, we know the answer because that once cameras are documenting every action, you guys aren't going to be able to lie your way out of situations anymore. That's the truth.
Right.
That's why they don't want it, and they're going to spin it. But just remember, when you hear a police union talking, they don't have your interest in mind at all. They have theirs. And police unions are one of the worst things that have happened to the community. Standing up for cops like Eric Garner is junk. And that guy who did so in New York, he should be ashamed of himself. And the public should call him on it. Trying to evoke sympathy for some people who murdered somebody because he was selling cigarettes illegally. Are you kidding?
Yeah. So much more stuff. And meanwhile, rapists, they have 60,000 rape test kits that have gone untested, and
that's right.
Any given
Vegas has an incredible number of rape kits untested. I forget the exact figure, but again, it's in the thousands, And it's interesting how little you hear about Vegas's crime problem or Vegas's dirty cop problem. And that's not an accident either. I mean, the entire town, we're talking about a town of almost 2 million people, and it runs on tourism. And obviously, stories about cop shootings and rape kits, these things are not good for tourism. So it's not an accident that this stuff stays out of the national headlines. And it's also not an accident that a lot of the big money who owns the casinos in Vegas also owns the media. Sheldon Adelson bought the Las Vegas Review-Journal recently, not too long. And you say, oh, well, why is this billionaire getting into the newspaper business? Why would anybody get into the newspaper business? I mean, it's clearly dying. I mean, you kind of have to ask yourself that question. Why is he presumably he became a billionaire because he was a very smart guy. And it doesn't seem like that's the next great wave, the newspaper business. So you got to ask yourself, why does the big money, why are they interested in owning the media in Vegas?
To spin the story every time, just the way they want it.
Yeah, he feared for his life. That's their standard line. He feared for his life. The officer feared for his life. And as long as they drop that one out there, so much of America just goes, oh, okay, I understand it now. And the other thing they do, especially in Las Vegas, is they dirty up the dead, which our movie talks about that to a great extent, about how they'll dirty up the dead. They'll basically make it, because if the public can see this person as a druggie or a drug dealer or a jerk or a criminal, then the public won't care, and it lets the police off the hook. So the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department particularly has a history doing this. They will just incidentally bring up a person's past, even if it has nothing to do with the events that unfolded as the person was getting killed, and for completely selfish reasons, so that the public will see that person as a druggie or a criminal, and they won't care that that person got shot and killed, even if it wasn't a justified killing. So the police do this for entirely selfish reasons. And the public really needs to examine and ask themselves, why are they bringing this up? Why are they bringing up this guy's criminal background in a press conference when it has nothing with what was going on, And it's just, it's not to help it's to let themselves off the hook, And so at it. I mean, by and large, these tactics work, and the public buys into it.
They're time-tested tactics, and they're straight out of the psychopath and narcissist playbook.
That's right.
It's
it's usually the person what they're encountering the cops. This is the first kind of encounter they've had with the cops, but the cops have seen thousands of situations. So the person walking into it's kind of at a disadvantage. The police know what works psychologically with the public, so they know how to dirty up the dead, and they're particularly good at doing that in Las Vegas.
Right. They've got the posthumous smear campaign down to a science, and it works every time. And it really does. And people, like you said, they don't question, well, what does that have to do with this? Oh, he didn't pay his child support.
Right.
Well, stuff like that.
They'll just slip it in there.
Right.
Oh, this. What does that have to do with what we're talking about? Oh, wait. Oh, it's so that the public can see him as a jerk. Got it. Okay. Next.
Yeah.
No, it's true. I mean, that's what they do, and it's because they're selfish, and because they're interested in themselves, and because it worked. And we need to start calling police departments out on this kind of stuff. They work for us, and they forget it, and they protect themselves, and the public lets them get away with it. Citizens need to start being more active and demanding accountability from the police department.
And they buy into these mock campaigns like Blue Lives Matter,
right.
which is at the one instance it's mocking Black Lives Matter, and at the other instance it's saying that that somehow their lives are devalued in some way because of who they are. And that's what they're taught. That's how they're brainwashed into fearing for their lives in really stupid situations where they shouldn't be. Because they really actually are brainwashed into thinking like every situation that they go into, they could end up dead.
We put our lives on the line. They love that one. Actually, Vegas's former sheriff, this wonderful human, I'm kidding, of course, named Doug Gillespie, he did all these press conferences where he would just go out and he was just fuming mad, like filled with like righteous indignation, just reminding that he's like, these officers put their lives on the line, and it's just, it's like people like Doug Gillespie can't go more than 5 minutes without reminding the public that these officers put their lives on the line. But what's interesting about that is, what statistically is the most dangerous occupation in the U.S.? Logging. And, I lived in Washington State for a while, and I've known plenty of loggers, and every single logger I've known can go more than 5 minutes without talking about how he puts his life on the line. It's like, but police officers can't. Like, they want to remind you of it. And it's like, well, you know what, pal? You did choose this job.
Right.
Nobody made you be a police officer, So it's like, no, but, they love that line. And it works, and they use it because it works. And Doug Gillespie uses it because it works. Because the public goes, yeah, it is a dangerous job. And I'm not disputing that. It is a dangerous job. But so is logging. And they don't have to, and they can go more than 2 minutes without reminding you of it.
Yeah, I was going to say linemen, but that's probably up there too. A
Did you say
lineman,
lineman?
a lineman, yeah. Like
Mm-hmm.
they get electrocuted and stuff all the time.
Oh yeah.
But the same rhetoric is used for soldiers. And right now we're in a situation where we're faced with militarized police force, and that line between military and police is becoming pretty blurred.
What's interesting about that is, I've always been um, on the artsy liberal side of things and was never a big pro-military guy. But making this movie, interestingly, a lot of people who become advocates of the film were former military people. And what I found is interesting is that a lot of military people are not on board with the way the police are behaving.
Correct.
One of the fathers of one of the victims, Eric Scott, who was shot and murdered by police, his name was Bill Scott. He's a great guy, former military guy. One of our biggest activists, the guy in charge of the Nevada cop block, Kelly Patterson, he was a former Marine. And a lot of even military people are kind of against what the police are doing, which I find fascinating. You would think those two would be closely aligned, but I found that they're not. And some of our biggest advocates are military people.
Right, because the military has more stricter codes of conduct, and you don't use your own military against your own people. And that's what's happening. When you militarize a police force, you're in essence using a military force against your people. And so that's a fundamental thing. That's just like for military people, they're very structured, and there's consequences for everything. There's a military tribunal for that shit. So the things that these cops are getting away with, they would have gone through 12 military tribunals for that kind of shit.
That there's more accountability in the military. I don't know. I have a lot of good things to say about a lot of the military folks who chipped in with us, like Bill Scott and Kelly Patterson.
There's more.
I think there's a clear line between military and police, but you're right. I mean, it is becoming kind of and a lot of cops are former military,
Right. Yes, quite a few, and especially with these more special type of intelligence police jobs, you're always getting military in those type of positions. And in the military, there's more accountability on the individual level, quite a lot less on the large scale level, because it's like, murder 1 million people, and it's called war, and murder one person, go to jail kind of thing. But I think murdering 1 million people is probably pretty bad thing to do. So there's that.
Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I was going
to say, even Antonio Buehler, whose Peaceful Streets organization is definitely advocating for more police accountability and filming the cops. Antonio Buehler is former military as well. And so it's fascinating how many people who are from the military kind of churn on that system later in life. I mean, some of the biggest activists, you're shocked to find that they used to be in the military, and I don't know what it is, but
I think it's because the military takes our warriors, so it sort of pimps that warrior spirit, pimps that out, for the psychopaths in charge, so to speak. And so, people who want to help, like we were talking about with police, they get involved, they get churned up in the system, and then they see the light, and they're like, oh no, they're very
end up getting out of there.
They're
I've met a lot of great former police officers who they saw, and like I said, the problem is not that most cops are bad. The problem is the ones who want to get away with it. And truly principled people, and I've met a lot of people who got out of policing because they saw that and they realized that they couldn't do battle with that system. And then if they did, well, all of a sudden they're going to be out of a job, because I mean, if you report a superior, I mean, there's a very well-known code in policing that if, the blue wall of silence, and if you go against an officer or whatever, there's going to be consequences. I mean, Serpico got shot in the eye under very suspicious circumstances after he'd like reported blown the whistle on police brutality. And but usually what happens is they just kind of like all of a sudden get brought up on some kind of like bogus internal affairs charges of like lying or whatever, and they find a way to like ace him out of the department. I've seen that a lot. There was a guy named Norm Jan who went through that in Las Vegas. They basically fired him for preposterous reasons. And meanwhile, you have, you know, all kinds of other cops basically getting away with murder, like Brian Yant. I mean, this is a guy who shot and killed somebody who was unarmed and was basically trying to flush marijuana down the toilet. And Brian Yant stormed in and shot and killed this guy. It was the third person he killed in under 10 years. And instead of, and Brian Yant is currently like making over $100,000 a year and is a high-ranking executive on the Police Protective Association. So this guy is, you know, the citizens of Las Vegas are letting this happen. They're allowing, you know, like Brian Yant's being paid a salary after demonstrating that he's you know, wildly incompetent and and many people would say a murderer. And I mean, were there any repercussions for this? None. You know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So in a system where there's no accountability, there's no repercussions, those sins are going to continue. And Absolutely. In a system that's built where the very mechanisms by which this sort of corruption is supposed to be gotten rid of, those very mechanisms are also part of the correct system. So
Absolutely. And I mean, I personally believe that Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department's Internal Affairs Division is an absolute joke. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you are investigating an incident where a citizen, I mean, you just look at the raw facts of the case, where a citizen calls 911 to report police brutality, and then a couple minutes later gets beaten up by those officers that he's reporting, and Internal Affairs decides that that's justified. You're talking about an Internal Affairs Division that's a joke. And I mean, honestly, I think Michelle Jotz and Christopher Little should be ashamed that they were a part of that. I mean, they were, you know, the bottom line is they helped that happen. I mean, they decided that was okay. They said, you know, in their internal affairs investigation, and they're one of the reasons that Mark Bellinger, Kyle Frett, and Jared Casper are right back out there on the street. And the other thing that was interesting was the police report. You know, right when I got out, I got a copy of my police report. And I mean, I just remember looking at it for the first time and being like, wow, you know, the guy who wrote this report, Cole Erskine, like if the policing thing doesn't work out, he should consider a career in creative writing, because he's clearly really good at like creating situations that flat out didn't exist. Mm-hmm. And when I looked at that police report, what I saw was a bunch of things that flat out didn't happen. And since the video never surfaced and they claimed that the cameras weren't running that night, there was fiction on that police report, and Cole Erskine got away with his fiction, you know? And mm-hmm. and it was like, it's just, you know, you really realize that the system is stacked against you. And that's what I realized. And I realized why justice is so elusive in a wildly corrupt town like Las Vegas, you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So. Well, thank you so much for joining me. And please do visit What Happened in Las Vegas. Thank you, Ramsey
actually
Denison.
What Happened in Vegas is the name.
In Vegas.
Yeah, and our was WHVegas.doc. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Bye.